Order. Want to welcome everybody, say good morning. I certainly want to thank the witnesses for taking the time to appear, for taking the time to really write, I think, some very thoughtful and revealing testimony. I'd ask unanimous consent to enter my written opening statement in the record, and Senator Carper is generally pretty good about not objecting, but without objection, so ordered. Let me just explain a little bit, really. This hearing has been in the workings for quite some time, and it was really spawned by somebody who cannot be here because of scheduling conflicts of the committee as well as himself. But Graham Wood wrote, I thought, a very interesting article published in The Atlantic a number of months ago, Inside the Mind of ISIS. And I would say it certainly caught this senator, I think an awful lot of people, policymakers in Washington, D.C. here, somewhat by surprise. It was pretty revealing. I've talked to enough people that really did not understand really the importance of the territorial gains and holding to create the caliphate and the chain of events, really what that set up. And so, we started in discussions, and although we don't have Mr. Wood here today, we have, I think he's a reporter. We've got the experts that I think he consulted with in terms of writing his thoughtful article. And so I'm really looking forward to the testimony here today. I just want to throw out one little stat, and this comes from the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism from the State Department. They call it their START report, which they initially published in 2012. The progression and the growth of terrorism is stark. And I've got, did we ever get the bottom of the differences, the numbers from 2014? Yes,
the difference was the State Department numbers are just based on a different definition of terrorism.
Okay, which should I use? Okay, which are even worse. So from 2012, the number of attacks reported by the State Departments in this report was 6,771. In 2014, the number of attacks had grown to 16,800 worldwide. That's a 2.5 times the number of attacks just 2 years earlier. In terms of deaths, in 2012, there were 11,000 individuals killed in terrorist attacks. In 2014, there were 43,500. That's almost a fourfold increase in terrorist attacks. So the fact of the matter is the risk, the threat of Islamic terror, from my standpoint, it is real. It is growing. The statistics prove it. And there's no way that we're going to be able to adequately address this unless we fully understand what motivates Islamic terrorists. This hearing is specifically about ISIS. But I think we can talk about Islamic terrorists in general and explore that. And what is their ultimate goal? And I think we'll hear testimony that we've got some contradictory goals as well, which makes it even more confusing in terms of how we deal with the issue. But again, I just want to thank my witnesses, and with that, I'll turn it over. I'll start the questioning. I really do want to concentrate on trying to describe the full dimension of this problem. Senator Carper talked about the number of Muslims in the world. It's about 1.6 billion, according to Pew Research. Dr. Hakel, do you have any sense in terms of what percent of Muslim population would identify with this extreme version, radical Islam, Islamic terrorism? Because 1% would be 16 million.
Right. Senator, you put your finger on it, which is that even a small percentage of people who identify with this movement would still be a very large number. I think, though, when it comes to identification, one has to make certain distinctions. So, for example, in Saudi Arabia, a country that I visit often, there are a number of people who don't actually share the Islamic State's ideology or goals. They would never want to be ruled by the Islamic State, but nonetheless feel that they're the good guys out there fighting the good fight, because they're fighting against Shiites, they're fighting against Americans, and so on. So there are people in the Middle East, for instance, who would never want to be ruled by them and don't identify with them, but still see them as heroes.
And support them financially, potentially?
They may private individuals may support them financially.
So again, is 1% wildly too large? I mean, again, I'm just trying to get some sort of feel, because often we say, well, this is just a very small, but a very small percentage can be a very large problem.
Right. So in terms of actual recruits, I think the numbers and estimates that I have seen vary from about 30,000 to 100,000. 100,000 out of 1.5 billion is a very, very small.
But again, that's recruits into ISIS, into the caliphate.
Yes, that's right. People who are fighting.
There are news reports that show that there are ISIS-affiliated branches in 30 different countries. We're seeing ISIS move into Afghanistan to take over the poppy fields. So you were talking about we don't want to overreact.
Right.
And you said, and by the way, I realize ISIS isn't going to come in and invade America and offer an existential threat there. I don't want to be putting ideas in the mind of terrorists, but it doesn't take much of an imagination to understand a coordinated, homegrown terrorist effort could do unbelievable economic harm. I mean, look at Brussels did not have a terrorist attack, and yet it shut down after the Paris attack. So we've heard a strategy of strategic patience. Okay, we don't want to overreact, but as long as ISIS maintains that territory, they're going to continue to inspire what could be incredibly damaging, maybe not existential, but unbelievably damaging. So how do we deal with it? I mean, do we recognize that territory as the primary motivator? Come and build, as Dr. Miramati was talking about. I mean, you come and build. Build that utopian society. As long as that territory exists, we're going to be under threat. And again, we'll continue to be, even if we defeat ISIS, even if we deny them territory, we've got all these affiliates, all these branches of this extreme ideology around the world. So what is the full extent of this threat? But I don't think strategic patience is working.
Well, military victory is the most significant contributor to recruitment. The fact that in 2014 they were able to conquer so much territory.
ISIS's military victory, correct?
Made them seem like they were the reality was confirming that they were chosen by God to represent Muslims and to win in the name of Islam. So making them lose militarily is extremely important in drying up the fantasy that they're projecting and the appeal that they have to recruit. So that's very important to defeat them militarily.
But again,
and to
would
make them
you be
lose
describing that as an overreaction? I want to go to Dr. Stern, because you're talking about the contradictory goals, which is, grow this movement, grow the caliphate, and at the same time draw us in to defeat them. So they end up with this, the final battle, Dabiq, or whatever. What is the name of that? Dabiq. Talk about that. Talk about that contradiction.
Yes, there is a contradiction. I don't think that our policy should be dictated just because they want us to fight them in a final battle in Dabiq. I mean, I do think we need to fight them. I think anything we can do to not feed into their fantasy that the West is at war with Islam is good. So therefore, special forces are better than big armies. Sunni Arab forces are much better than Western forces. But I think it is important to point out that, as you say, this organization is now in many parts of the world. In Libya, it's very important, Afghanistan, and it's also here. It's an ideology that's here. I am not sure that narrative of victory that I know you are quite interested in is so important. I think that in the sense that why victory? Victory is important because of this sense of disenfranchisement and humiliation and the sense that Islam has fallen behind the West. It has. We need to find a way for young Muslims and those who sympathize with them, including converts, to find another way to be heroes.
But rebuilding these societies that existed for quite some time, these governments that are authoritarian, okay, that defend our sensibility of freedom and democracy, that's a long-term project. Can we sit back and be strategically patient and allow this caliphate and the territory to exist and have that threat continue to grow? Because I think it'll continue to grow. Maybe, okay, so if one way we can counteract that goal is don't let the final battle be in Dabiq. Let's take Dabiq first. And let the final battle be someplace else. I'm not being flippant here.
Yeah.
We have to understand what they're trying to accomplish. But again, I just don't think we can be strategically patient. I think we have to defeat them. I think we have to deny that territory as our first step in a very long struggle. And let's face it, this struggle, let me be clear. We're not declaring war on Islamic terrorists. They declared war on us. You know, I think definitely starting in the early 90s with the bombing of the Cole and the attack in Saudi Arabia, and then the attempt to take down the Twin Towers initially in New York. If you're going to end a war, there's two ways of doing it. Either both sides agree to end the war, and it's obvious to me that Islamic terrorists aren't agreeing to end the war, or one side has to be defeated. And so, trying to make this simple, I sit there and go, well, this caliphate is something pretty attractive. People want to go there. They want to either get there physically or become adherents and kill where, as they're being encouraged to, kill where they are. So to me, that's the first step that we have to undertake, and the sooner the better. I just don't think we can be strategically patient. I'll go to you, Dr. Vidino, I'm sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. I think the reason for ISIS' success, it's its success, the fact that it has controlled territory. I think the Syrian conflict had gone in a different way for a variety of reasons, and Jabhat al-Nusra had taken over territory and created this state-like structure. Jabhat al-Nusra would be the big problem we would be facing. I think ISIS was just better militarily. There's a lot of circumstances there on the ground that led ISIS to be the one controlling territory, but it's that territoriality which is the main appeal for a lot of people, whether it's in the Middle East or here in the West. I think to some degree, I don't want to be overly negative, but it's almost too late because the state has been around for a year and a half now. So that idea, even if we were tomorrow to completely destroy what is the Islamic State, the idea or the fact that they created that society for a year and a half will linger for a long, long time, and you will find plenty of groups that will try to recreate that. Obviously, there are also, from a strictly military and terrorism point of view, significant problems in keeping that structure there. Obviously, there's more pressure on them now and makes it to some degree more difficult, clearly, to expand their territory. They're losing territory. There is some pressure that does not allow them to plan attacks in the way they would probably have been able a few months ago, but now they are indeed planning them more. So yes, they are being bombed, they are running from place to some degree, but part of that strategy has been that they're also trying to carry out attacks. And I think Paris was obviously probably the first successful one, at least in the West, of attack that was planned with some strategy. It wasn't just left to some lone individual to carry out. There was some strategy behind, some planning, centralized planning involved. Clearly, I think that was one of the lessons from the 9/11 Commission. The more you allow an organization, a terrorist organization, and ISIS is more than a terrorist organization, but the more you allow them to plan and have a sanctuary, the more dangerous they're going to be.
They have revenue streams. They control research labs within universities. I'll just quick let Dr. Mirmati comment, and then I'll turn it over to Senator Carper.
Well, I definitely agree with the comments of my colleagues. I just want to add, though, that I don't think long-term-wise, generationally, we're not going to bomb our way out of this problem. So even if we solve the military battles and we win against ISIS in terms of its controlling territory, ISIS is just a metastasized version of al-Qaeda and the groups that came before it. So I think what we really need to bring to bear on this struggle is our other resources, both domestically and through foreign policy. For example, let's face it, our Western governments have been complicit or tacitly allowing a lot of the Gulf states to export this very virulent, intolerant ideology across the Muslim world and throughout Western countries. It has, destroyed the cultural fabric of a lot of these countries. And I mean, thousands and thousands of Pakistanis and Afghanis and Asians and Africans have died trying to defeat it. So I think it's very important that we use our diplomatic leverage with those countries to tell them to stop exporting that stuff and try fixing all the damage that they've caused so far. In addition, we should also bolster the efforts of countries like Egypt, who's now in a post-Islamist government, who wants to use its might and its religious infrastructure to start exporting the opposite and start exporting a pluralistic interpretation of Islam. And I think, and that, quite frankly, is the core. It's the mainstream fundamental of Islam. So let's help them, empower them to be able to do this in a way that's authentic to the rest of the Muslim world. So I think from a foreign policy perspective and from a strategy, we still have a lot of resources to bear on this problem that we need to do long term. And then domestically, as I mentioned, we need to be intervening and preventing the radicalization in the first place. So
again, I understand it's multifaceted, a generational problem, but just quick answer. We have to deny them that territory, correct?
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
the fact that caliphate exists is a real problem.
Absolutely, but, you know, we still have all these other steps that we have
No, I know, it's a
simultaneously.
nasty, big problem, I got it. Okay, Senator Carper. Let's say 10,000 refugees, which is just a pittance in terms of the refugee problem, is why don't we establish criteria, allow women and children that have been properly vetted, that are relatives of Syrian American citizens that can financially support them? I mean, wouldn't that make sense? So, you know, hopefully the administration would take that type of advice, and I don't think that. Let me quick pick up on that point, because it ties in. I've got 3 questions left. Dr. Miramati, you talked about the need for basically a reverse Wahhabism process or project. They're not believing, and I've met with a young Yazidi woman as well, and you're right, it's horrific, you know, the treatment. How far along that reverse process are we? I think I know, but I want to hear about it from you.
Not very far along.
We're a long ways.
We're a long ways, but I think it's to the point that Dr. Stern mentioned about not really believing what our problem is. We're just kind of throwing a lot of things at it and being like, well, if we just do this, it'll go away. If we just do that, it'll go away. And I've been doing this 20 years. It's not going away.
No,
It's
this
just
is a
getting worse.
long-term process,
Yes.
a tough, long slog.
Right, exactly. And also we have to get over the issue of our trepidation of dealing with religion. So once we can overcome these 2 aspects and really, you know, confront what we're up against, and then not be afraid of invoking religion when it could be helpful to our mutual causes, Muslim and non-Muslim, a whole lot of other tools will open up to us.
You know, obviously, that was the purpose of this hearing, is lay out a reality. Even if we don't like it, we don't want to face it, it's the only way to solve a problem is first define it properly and admit you have one. Dr. Hakel, can we just get back to some basics? Because I really think this is very confusing to most Americans. Why are Sunnis wanting to kill Shia and vice versa? I mean, can you just describe the Sunni-Shia split within Islam?
Well, it's a split that dates back to the 1400 years, to the time when, after the death of the Prophet, there was a difference of opinion over succession, over who was to succeed the Prophet. And the majority went one way and a minority went the other way. The majority are the Sunnis, the minority are the Shias. Now, over time, this sectarian split, you can think of it as Catholic versus Protestant. It was not actually mobilized for military purposes or for sectarian wars. It's only evident historically and today when states, when governments choose to use this form of identity, form of religious identity, for very specific purposes, typically geostrategic and purposes, to achieve goals that states want to achieve. So you see
What was the first instance of states using this split to go to war with each other?
Well, the most prominent one in pre-modern times was when the Ottomans fought the Safavids. The Ottomans were based in Turkey, and the Safavids were based in Iran, and they used this. This difference in religion to fight one another. Today, we see it in the fight between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But I think one has to dig deeper than just the sectarian. I mean, the sectarian language gives cover for what is otherwise a battle over
Geopolitics.
power. Correct.
Okay. And then even within the Sunni, I mean, even within the Shia Sunni, there's factions within those groups as well, which is, again, even more confusing. You have, Sunni governments obviously wanting to destroy ISIS because ISIS wants to destroy them. They're all basically kind of Sunni-based, correct?
That's correct. There are divisions within it, and my advice to the U.S. government is not to enter into the fray of these sectarian wars, because we shouldn't take sides, for one, and two, I don't think, again, we have standing to decide, what is and isn't correct Islamically. I think we should be very hard-nosed about what our interests are and pursue those relentlessly.
And what are those interests then? Again, we want to defeat ISIS.
Right.
In order to do that, from my standpoint, and this is kind of my third question too, is we need to develop that, what I have been calling a committed coalition of the willing. And I often use the model of the first Gulf War, where literally our coalition partners supplied 240,000 troops to that effort, paid for about 85% of it. Now, that is a committed coalition of the willing, but today we need a committed coalition of Sunni Arab states, correct? Because of the history, because we've bugged out, because we haven't, we've had some problems. Can you just describe the lack of confidence from your perspective of Sunni states right now in American leadership and why they might be reluctant to join this coalition?
The principal reason Sunni states are not joining fully this coalition is because they don't regard ISIS as the principal enemy that they're facing. So the Saudis, for instance, would think that Iran is much more dangerous. The Turks think that the Kurds are much more dangerous. And frankly, both Iran itself is playing a double game in that it's both convenient for ISIS to exist there because it keeps the Sunni world in disarray, and it creates an enemy that is convenient for the Iranians, and it brings the West on to side with Assad and to side with Iran. So, you know, this is a part of the world where, you know, what's really happening is not obvious, and one cannot have any illusions because all of these states use these forces like ISIS for their own purposes.
So I would like to give you the opportunity to just go through that in a little bit greater detail. You know, I guess starting with Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and just really describe in detail what their aims are, who they're concerned about, who their true enemy is, who their corollary enemy is. Because again, it's incredibly complex. Can you just step through that again in greater detail?
Sure, and I will be, you know, in a
And
thumbnail.
again, kind of talking about their strategic goals and aims.
The Saudis basically want to reverse Iranian influence throughout the Arab world. They consider Iran's projection of power, especially through non-state actors like Hezbollah and the militias of southern Iraq, to be unacceptable, and they want to roll it back because they want to dominate that region. They consider it Arab, and they consider that they're the dominant power in that area.
And what was their goal in terms of the Wahhabism schools and setting all that up?
Actually, the Saudis were never involved in setting up Wahhabism in either Iraq or Syria, because the regimes in those two countries, authoritarian regimes, would not permit the Saudis to do this. So the conversion of the Sunnis of Syria and Iraq to Salafism is a very recent thing. And it's, I think, you know, there are reasons for why they're doing this, why the Sunnis are becoming Salafis. I think it's to do with power again.
So maybe not there, but they spread Wahhabism.
They spread
elsewhere.
Wahhabism throughout the world.
And their aim in doing that was?
Well, actually, it was largely to fight against communism and Arab socialism and Arab nationalism. They were threatened by a form of politics that was deeply destabilizing to monarchical rule. So they spread an Islamic solidarity, Islamic identity movement and campaign beginning in the early 60s, largely and often in coordination with us, actually.
So to really protect the House of Saud?
Correct.
Okay, so there's encapsulated the Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Move on to Iran then.
So Iran basically has yet to decide whether it's a country, a normal country, or a revolution. And inasmuch as the hardliners in Iran still believe in the revolution, they want to project the power of Iran, militarily, but also soft power, revolutionary power, through proxies from the Palestinian territories.
So
all the way
describe that in detail, because everybody talks about they're the largest, you know, recognize the largest state-sponsored terror. Describe that. I mean, describe the groups they're supporting and why they're doing it.
Right. So they support certain factions amongst the Palestinians. Hamas, for a while, was on their payroll, and there's another faction in Gaza that's with Islamic Jihad, that's with Iran. In Lebanon, they have Hezbollah. They have a number of militias in southern Iraq. They support the Assad regime and a number of militias also that are fighting with the Assad regime. As far as the Middle East is concerned, by far the most destabilizing country has been Iran. The Assad regime, for instance, which would not have survived without Iranian backing, has killed close to 300,000 people, has made 11 million people displaced and as refugees. So, you know, ISIS actually pales in comparison with Iran in terms of instability in the region.
What about Turkey?
Turkey is an interesting country in as much as it has been cut off from the Middle East for some 80 years, and it's rediscovered the Middle East and thought that it could, as a successful country, could dominate it through soft power. Turkey has quickly realized that the Middle East is much more complicated, and they thought, I think until recently, that ISIS could be contained. And then ISIS started a suicide bombing campaign against the Turks. So the pipeline of recruits has shut down as a result of this. But Turkey still remains in an old model of thinking about the world. For them, the Kurds remain the most dangerous element because they represent 20% of the Turkish population and could potentially secede from the country.
Can you talk about the difference within the Kurdish population between those in Turkey, the PKK, the Iraqi Kurds?
I mean, there are differences certainly between them politically, but on the whole, I would think of the Kurds as an American, as natural allies for us, especially those in Syria and in Iraq. They are a long-suffering population. They've really suffered and never had their own country. And you can think of them almost like Israel, as a group of people that will always be a natural ally of the United States in the region.
Okay. Anybody else want to feed into this line of questioning? And seeing Senator Booker's been faithful sticking around, I'll let you have a couple extra questions as well. But anybody else want to comment on this? I'll tell you, as a Protestant Lutheran, if there's a radical band of Lutherans committing terrorist attack after terrorist attack, I'd call them, Lutheran terrorists, and I would denounce them and I would renounce them. And I think that's part of the problem. The truth is the truth. Reality is reality, and this strain, which we'll all admit is a small percentage, has got to be defeated. So again, I just want to thank Senator Booker.
Mr. Chairman, can we have a hearing on Lutheran terrorists, please, come in? I think
I'm not aware it's a problem. You prove me it's a problem, we'll have a hearing. Again, I just want to thank all the witnesses, all the senators that came here. We had great attendance, excellent questions. I think we did lay out some reality here. I think we helped further define the problem, and it is incredibly complex, and it's going to be a long-term project trying to solve it. With that, the hearing record will remain open for 15 days until February 4th at 5 p.m. for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is adjourned.